Well, I was gonna make a Dying Light 2 video this week, but there seems to be a sort of memory leak-like bug happening at the moment that's preventing me from playing it for very long at a time, so I've had to play it in sort of short bursts, and that's not really conducive to getting very much done very quickly. So, sorry about that, I'm not gonna be able to make the Dying Light 2 video this week, although I do believe that bug was fixed with the latest patch that just hit at the time that I'm recording this, so that's good at least. I will be able to actually work on that for next week. So instead, I had to focus on what else I've been playing this week, and that, of course, is Path of Exile, because the new expansion and the new league just dropped. This is a pretty big deal because it completely restructures how the endgame works, as well as having a pretty fun new challenge league to go through. So I wanted to talk about the new league and the completely new endgame and how it all works, because I think now is a really good time to get into Path of Exile if you've looked at it and felt confused and not known if you actually want to try it yet or not. So here we go. First, let's start with the actual new challenge league itself, the smaller bit of the content, and that is the Archnemesis League. The Archnemesis League is probably the most straightforward challenge league we've had since, I'd say, Ritual. And it's pretty basic, but in a good way, as in it doesn't have a whole bunch of bloaty mechanics that don't need to be there. It's very simple, very easy to understand, but can create some quite challenging combats later on in the game. So the way that it works is, as you're exploring through these story acts and the endgame maps both, you will find these modifiers that drop from specific monsters. Rare monsters, the yellow rarity monsters, have a higher chance of dropping them, although blue magic rarity monsters can drop them as well, just at a lower rate, which makes sense because rares appear as single monsters and magic monsters appear in hordes. There are about 60 of these new modifiers to find, which is a lot, and each modifier has a specific thing that it does to the monster that it modifies, as well as a specific reward type that it guarantees that monster will drop once you're able to kill it. Also in the areas you'll find these creepy statues called Archnemesis statues that have a petrified monster on them that's all chained up. And the monster, by the way, will actually be appropriate for the area that you're in. It will be a monster from the particular zone that you're going through at the time. So how it works is kind of like a combination of Metamorph and Essences a little bit. You just interact with one of these statues and you will see 4 slots, and you can place one of these modifiers into a slot and then break out the monster. The monster will then be affected by that modifier and drop that specific kind of loot once you actually kill it. You'll then find another statue and place another modifier in that one, and so on, and the trick is the modifier that you put in the first one will still be present on the second one, and the first 2 will be present on the third one, and so on, so you'll end up getting the first reward 4 times and the second reward 3 times, and so on, and the monster will get stronger and stronger as it builds up all these modifiers until the very 4th one that you fight, where it'll have all 4 mods at once, so it'll be extremely powerful, but it'll drop 4 different sets of rewards as well. So it's basically a sort of build your own boss kind of concept where you put these modifiers together and fight various empowered monsters to get some really nice rewards. And honestly, the rewards from this league are really, really good. You can get things like all sorts of skill gems and gem cutters prisms, divination cards, guaranteed uniques, harbinger things including full-on ancient orb drops and some stuff like that, and even other things as well like simulacrum splinters and cluster jewels and stuff. There's a whole bunch of different rewards that you can obtain from doing this, and the idea is to combine them in clever ways to get the maximum rewards possible. But there is a little bit more to it, because of these roughly 60 modifiers that are currently in the game, 35 of them have to be crafted by you, and you do this by combining multiple on the same monster so that that monster will then drop a sort of new crafted modifier that you can only get from doing so. The earliest ones you're likely to find are the Weaver and Strider ones, so there are Weaver modifiers that are elementally empowered monsters like Frost Weaver and Flame Weaver and so on, and there's also a Hasted modifier that makes them faster. If you combine one of those and Hasted, that monster will then drop a Strider modifier like Frost Strider or Flame Strider of that element, and it's a sort of more powerful, more rewarding version. And this is how it works. You will be crafting all sorts of new modifiers as you go on, just experimenting with all the ones that you have to create new ones. And if you don't want to look up a list online or anything like that, the game actually does include a hint system so that when you're at a statue and you have modifiers in your inventory that can be combined to form a new one, they'll glow, they'll have a glowing border. A silver glowing border means that 2 of those can be combined, and a gold glowing border means that 3 of them will make a new one. And oftentimes the ones that you can craft are very much more rewarding and also more difficult than the ones that you can find as drops. So even once you get into maps and things, you'll still be coming up with new combinations and adding new gameplay to your loop, and they also tend to be worth quite a bit of experience as well, so they're good for leveling in the end game. So I really like this mechanic. I think it's a really fun league because it's so straightforward, but it also has a lot of longevity to it because of the difficulty and reward of the encounters, making them enjoyable all the way through the game and into the end game. And as far as the recent mechanics that they've tried out, I'm looking at you, Scourge, this is one that I would actually like to see them keep, because I think it's really awesome, and if they wanted to like replace Metamorph with it, I would be okay with that, if they felt that they were too similar and they didn't want both of them at once. But otherwise, I would definitely like to see them actually keep this, because I think the rewards are actually worth it, and it's enjoyable to craft your own boss to fight. But of course, this new Challenge League is far from the only new thing about Path of Exile this time around. They've also come out with the Siege of the Atlas expansion that completely changes how the endgame systems work. For those who don't know, the end game of Path of Exile focuses on running maps, these little stone tablets that you can put in a map device that open up a sort of pocket dimension that you can run through, then they get harder and harder as you go. This end game has long been described as a little bit messy, because you go from a 10-act, very structured story to this very open, sort of what do I do now experience, and some people have kind of been burned out by this very quickly because they just don't know what they should be doing. And this helps to add a lot of structure, this expansion, to the end game to make it more, well, structured, and also just more about, it's sort of a build your own end game experience, effectively, because now we have this. Yes, this thing. Their response to some people complaining that the character level up skill tree was a little bit intimidating was to add an entire second one to the game. So this is the new Atlas skill tree. It has all sorts of different nodes on it, all contributing to various different mechanics that you can encounter at endgame, and the overall point of this is for you to choose which mechanics you like the most and to build towards finding more of those and improving them so that your endgame experience is more tailored to the content that you like to play. So for someone like me that likes incursion and ritual a whole lot, I can immediately start building towards making incursion and ritual sites more common to find and also improved in various ways. And there's a ton of stuff on this tree, as you can very plainly see, that improves pretty much every aspect of the endgame depending on exactly what you want to go for. So how do you get these points? Well, the points are actually obtained mostly from completing bonus objectives on new maps, and this means that the points are very front-loaded. You'll be getting your first, dozen or so very quickly, because when you first start running maps, every map is a new map, and you can also get a couple from some other sort of story Atlas moments that you'll encounter later in the game, but for the most part, you'll be gathering them from completing map objectives. You can also get an item that allows you to respec, and it costs 2 orbs of regret per one of them, so that basically means 2 character respec points per 1 Atlas respec point if you want to do so. This is also part of the huge change that there are no more regions in the Atlas. The way that it was laid out before was that all maps were part of one of 4 regions, and you affected each region individually, so you were basically only about 25% of your maps were relevant at a time, depending on which region you were working on. I really didn't like that system. I thought it was needlessly restrictive, and I'm very glad to see it gone. Now, all maps are all one region, and everything that affects some maps affects all maps. This also helps the whole play it your way, choose your own endgame thing, because now you don't have to feel forced to focus on specific regions at a time, and instead you can play the maps you want to play with the content that you want to play because of your Atlas spec, and it allows your endgame to be, I guess, kind of unique to you in a way, because a lot of these Atlas passives that you can allocate now really drastically affect the content in different ways, not only making it more common for you to find, but also adding all sorts of extra rewards and extra challenges and things to them to ensure that your experience is probably not going to be someone else's experience unless you have done exactly the same Atlas spec as they have. This has led to some other pretty sweeping changes as well. For instance, the previous idea of the endgame Atlas was to go to the 4 regions and find these conquerors. They were boss fights that you would encounter eventually, and every time you beat one of them, you would get one of these things called a watchstone, and you could socket a watchstone on the tower of that region of the Atlas, and it would upgrade the maps of that one region. And you could also use these things called Sextants to apply modifiers to those watchstones that would modify that region of maps with extra challenge and extra rewards in different ways. So because there were 4 regions, each one having 4 watchstones each, that was 16 watchstones that you had to collect at endgame to empower your Atlas. That has been completely removed. Watchstones are no longer in the game, and of course, since there are no more regions, that whole system has been scrapped. And instead, you obtain these things called void stones. There are only 4 of them, not 16 that you have to find, but you do start finding them much later in your exploration of the endgame maps than you would start finding watchstones. But this also means that socketing in 1 void stone upgrades all of the maps on the Atlas instead of just 25% of them like it worked before. Sextants have also been changed. The tier 1 and 2 sextants are no longer in the game because you're not going to be finding these void stones as early as you would normally find those sextants, so they would be useless. Now only tier 3 and 4 sextants are in the game, but there have been a whole bunch of new modifiers that they can add to void stones that make them even more powerful than before, and of course there's the fact that without regions, one sextant modifier upgrades the whole atlas, all maps with that modifier instead of just a quarter of them again, so that's really nice. I mentioned structure, and that's because there's also a bit more of a structure for you to work towards now. Instead of just sort of randomly finding the Conquerors and fighting them for Watchstones, now you're going to, of course, face the Maven, get her Crucible going, and eventually face the Maven herself, and now you will be facing against 4 new bosses that are the end game of Path of Exile. Namely, you'll be facing off against the Searing Exarch and his right-hand man, and the Eater of Worlds and his right-hand man as well. And these are the 2 new big bad bosses of the Atlas, and I'm sure they are quite difficult, but I have not gotten to them yet, so I couldn't tell you exactly how hard they are. But I'm guessing very hard, because they are canonically after Cirrus, so I'm guessing they're at least more difficult than Cirrus was. So basically what they've done is create a more structured endgame while also leaving it open enough for you to decide what content you want to play. Basically they've said these are your objectives, exactly how you reach them is up to you. You know, the endgame is all about building your own experience out of it, but you are still going for a structured set of objectives that you're supposed to reach. But your exact path to reaching those objectives is going to be a little bit different depending on exactly which maps you want to play and what sort of content that you want in those maps. I think this is a really smart idea because, like I said, the endgame maps of Path of Exile have long been a point of contention on players. Some people thinking that they were awesome and other people thinking that they were just too unstructured and just like a big gameplay mass of stuff and not knowing what to do with themselves. So allowing you to explore it your own way while also giving you a specific set of objectives to achieve is a really good idea, and I think this is probably the best thing they could have done. There are a lot more changes that I'm not mentioning because this video would be like an hour long if I went through everything, but one of the new ideas is that the way the endgame crafting system has changed because of the new way that you can influence items. So for people that have not really played Path of Exile till the endgame, influenced items were previously some of the most powerful stuff that you could get a hold of. They were influenced by one of the specific endgame entities that you were there to fight, either one of the Conquerors, the Shaper, or the Elder, just one of these endgame entities that you could come across. And their influence gave that piece of equipment a specific modifier that couldn't be found any other way, so they had an extra bit of stats on them that you could only get this way, and it made them very strong. The main way to get them was to go to a map of the Atlas that was influenced by that specific entity, and then the loot of that area could drop under their influence. So basically, you didn't make influenced items, you found them that way. And an item could only have one influence at a time. However, with the new Searing Exarch and Eater of Worlds stuff, this has changed. You will now actually find these things called Eldritch Embers and Eldritch Ichors that add that entity's influence to an item. So you can actually make an influenced item yourself this way, and they can both influence the same item. So you can actually have an item with 2 influences at once. This means that at the end game, these can become the most powerful items in the game for you. There's also a couple of other things that affect us in different ways, like the new Domination System. Basically, an item is considered dominated by one entity or the other, depending on which of the 2 modifiers is a higher tier. So if you have a tier 2 Eater of Worlds modifier and a tier 1 Searing Exarch modifier, that item is considered dominated by the Eater of Worlds. And there are some new currencies that affect items in different ways depending on which domination they have. Things like the new Eldritch Chaos Orb and Eldritch Exalted Orb modify items in different ways depending on who actually dominates it. And the absolute tip-top of the endgame is basically about forging an item with a tier 6 modifier from one and a tier 4 modifier from the other to have the absolute most powerful things that you can achieve. But that is like way at the very end of the endgame that you'll be looking for stuff like that. I'm nowhere near that. I'm only at like tier 3 maps currently, so I've still got a long way to go before that, but that's what the absolute end goal is about right now. And that's kind of just a basic overview of Siege of the Atlas and of the new Archnemesis League. There's a lot here, but I feel like it's presented in a much less messy, more structured way than Path of Exile has ever presented its endgame, and I feel that because of this, it's actually a better time than ever to try the game out if you've never tried it before, or to try it again if you previously got sort of burnt out at endgame and didn't know what to do. It's, in my opinion, a really good set of changes for the endgame to make it just really fun, and the whole choose-your-own endgame idea is very compelling for a game that has this many options in it, like a ridiculous amount of options for you to build towards. So all of that comes together to make a really, really nice refinement of the endgame experience that is absolutely worth reaching and messing around with, especially bearing in mind that this game is, of course, free to try out, free to play completely. So yeah, that is the current state of Path of Exile. I'm definitely enjoying my time with it, and I'm going to be diving back into it a whole bunch while I'm waiting for Dying Light 2 to get fixed. So thank you guys very much for watching. I'll make sure to make that video next. Sorry again about that. And do try out Path of Exile if you're at all interested in ARPGs like this, because it is a very well-refined example of one. I'll see you guys next time.